Dryman is assigned a capable defense attorney named W.M. Black. Black wants the case better examined before Dryman is put to death. In May, he submits 2 official petitions of clemency to the governor of Montana.
Governor Bonner reviewed the case. He concluded that there was no doubt of his guilt, no doubt of the brutality of the crime. He saw no legal extenuating circumstances for him to intervene. He didn't grant clemency.
So even though Dryman had confessed, a lawyer actually came onto the case to represent him and made a motion for him to withdraw his guilty plea and actually proceed with trial.
On May 29th, just 3 days before the hanging is to take place, Dryman's attorney files an appeal with the Montana Supreme Court. Dryman is granted a 70-day stay of execution, pending the High Court's decision.
Now the legal wranglings drag on. It wasn't until the beginning of 1952 that the Supreme Court ruled that he could change his plea. Then there was an additional year before the next trial. All this time, the time of Shelby and my family were left waiting for justice.
On January 13th, 1953, Frank Dryman is again sentenced to hang for the murder of Clarence Pellet. Dryman's attorneys, however, issue yet another appeal.
The Communist Party didn't feel that they could get a fair trial before Judge Hatterson. After several appeals, they finally got it moved out of his jurisdiction into Havre, Montana. The whole thing became a political fight over the death penalty. So now the Pellet family was drugged through 4 years of appeals and trials. All this strain, especially on my grandmother, developed a rift in the family. She married a man that my father did not approve of. They had a big fight, and they never spoke to each other ever again. I never grew up with any extended family on the Pellet side. I never knew them because of this incident.
In 1955, Frank Dryman receives a new trial, his third, this time by jury, and held in nearby Hill County.
Ultimately, he was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole.
With Frank Dryman's third and final sentence, he is sent to a federal penitentiary. The years pass, and the people of Shelby are oblivious when Frank Dryman commits his next crime.
One time, my father spoke to me of this murder. I was 6 or 7 years old. He told me that my grandfather was murdered by a hitchhiker while he was begging for his life. So he warned me never to pick up a hitchhiker. I never knew anything else about this murder until April of 2009. In February of 2009, my mother had a stroke. We then cleaned out her place and we found a box of all of her memories she collected over her 80 years. And we shipped it all home here to Bellevue, Washington. About a month later, I decided it was time I looked through this box of memories. About an hour into it, I found a bunch of newspaper articles. Montana man missing, brutal murder. I knew that this was about my grandfather's murder, and I decided at that time, I need to research this more. I need to find out what happened. I went on the internet, and I found that the Montana Parole Board website came up, and they had labeled him as an absconder. I yelled to my wife, I said, he's a fugitive. He's gone. He was paroled in 1969, and in 1972, he just disappeared into thin air. We don't know where he is. In 1955, he was incarcerated. He'd been given a life sentence. But 5 years later, he was trying to get out of prison. He was writing letters. He was doing petitions. He didn't think that he had really done anything wrong.
And he had been writing to the parole board that he was a changed person and asking to be let out on parole.
My father, he had made it a point to go to each one of Dryman's parole hearings to make sure someone was there to object to him being paroled. He was the only Pellet family member that did that. In January 1968, my father died of a heart attack. 10 months later, there was another hearing. At that hearing, Dryman was granted parole because no one was there to object.
In 1969, Frank Dryman is paroled to his brother, who lives in California. For 2 years, he works and even gets married to a young widow. But then, in October of 1971, suddenly and without warning, Dryman disappears, as if into thin air. Authorities look everywhere for Dryman, and a warrant for his arrest is issued by the FBI. But as the years go on, it is as if the name Frank Dryman no longer exists.
I didn't think that was right. I needed to find this guy and see what happened to him. I started to gather so much information that started to take over my life. I called the Montana Parole Board, so a very nice lady answered the phone, and I told her about my investigation of my grandfather's murder. She said, I happen to have that file right here on my desk. And I said, that's exactly what I want. Can you give me a copy of that? No, my supervisor said I can't give you anything. And I hung up that phone and I thought to myself, there's nothing in the world I want more than that file. But I'm a dentist. I'm an oral surgeon. I don't know how to go about this. Around the holidays that year, we were having dinner with some friends, and they had a daughter who had just recently graduated from Santa Clara Law School. During the conversation, Emily told me she didn't have any cases and that she could help me with this.
I made a phone call to the Montana authorities and was told the same thing that Clem had been told, that the public did not have a right to access Dryman's files. So I did a little research and found out that the Montana Constitution actually does allow us access, and I sent a letter to the Montana authorities to that effect, and they agreed to give us part of Dryman's file. One of the pieces of information we got from the parole records was various social security numbers that Dryman had used under various names, that Mr. Dryman had been paroled from Montana to the state of California. Then our question was, well, where in California, and is he still alive, and should we look for him?
I don't think he's alive. I think the only thing we're really going to find is a gravestone. As I was telling my wife, this is one heck of a story, and I can't stop it here. Every story has an ending. I need to find out what happened. So I collated all the information, and we decided to hire a private investigator.
What is soon discovered will reawaken nearly 60 years of pain long held dormant in a small Montana community. It is a discovery that will exceed all of Clem Pellet's assumptions and eventually bring him face to face with a killer.